2 bodies dropped before the second verse of the hymn was over. A longtime usher lay face up in a pool of blood. And on the altar steps, Pastor Gregory Talbert, a man praised for his discipline, family life, and unshakable sermons, was slumped behind the pulpit, shot twice at close range. The shooter didn't run. She stood there, frozen, eyes locked on the cross behind him. Her name was Raven Elise, a 28-year-old trans sex worker with no criminal record, no gang affiliations, and no known history of violence. But in her bag were screenshots, call logs, bank receipts, and one short note. Tell them who he really was. What investigators uncovered next was not just a secret life. It was an entire double existence. The man who called himself Shepherd had been living in shadows, hiring workers under false names, misusing church funds, and, just days earlier, refusing to pay Raven after an encounter that left her humiliated. But this wasn't just revenge. This was personal. This was a reckoning. And by the time the truth came out, the only question left was, how long had everyone been pretending not to see it? Before the altar turned into a crime scene, Pastor Gregory Talbert was a man seen as unshakable. He'd been the senior pastor at his church for 9 years. The church, tucked in the heart of a modest Texas suburb, had grown under his leadership, modestly but steadily. Attendance hovered around 300 on Sundays. The members spoke of him as warm, focused, disciplined. He was never flashy, never scandalous, just steady. Gregory was 44, married to his high school sweetheart, Melissa, for 17 years. She led the women's ministry and oversaw most of the children's programs. They had 2 kids, Kendrick, 16, a quiet, intelligent student, and Brielle, 11, outgoing and popular in her church circle. The Talberts were the picture of order and values, but what no one knew was that Pastor Gregory Talbert had been keeping secrets for most of his adult life. Years before the shooting, he had quietly checked into a private behavioral center under a pseudonym. The reason, later confirmed through hospital records and insurance traces, was impulse control therapy, primarily for sexual addiction. The treatment lasted 6 weeks. There was no mention of it in church files, and no record ever surfaced within leadership. It was a secret he carried back home and buried under routine. According to private browser logs retrieved post-mortem, Gregory had been accessing adult content and escort services long before his ordination. In his early 30s, the frequency spiked. As his church grew, so did his discretion. He began using encrypted browsing tools and prepaid cards. He adopted aliases, booked hotel rooms under fake ministry names, scheduled meetings under the guise of pastoral counseling. But despite the layers of cover, Gregory was deliberate, never reckless, always planning. At home, Melissa noticed his detachment years before the incident. She'd confided in her sister Danielle that Gregory had become more emotionally unavailable, less patient, more guarded with his devices. But she dismissed it as pastoral fatigue, something most church wives silently endured. Kendrick, their teenage son, once mentioned that Dad was always in his head. But again, nothing alarming, just a quiet shift, a stillness that grew over time. He never discussed these urges, never sought a second round of therapy, never admitted relapses to anyone, not even during annual church retreats where pastors were encouraged to confess and be restored. But in truth, he never believed he needed restoring. He believed he was managing it. By the time he met Raven Elise, it wasn't a fall from grace. It was just another night in a long chain of hidden ones, a chain that was finally about to break. The digital trail didn't lie. His hotel bookings followed a pattern. Mid-range, never too high-end, always cash. Often made in towns 30 to 45 minutes away, likely to avoid local suspicion. The guest name would be different, but the phone number, burner or not, was always traced back to the same limited geographic radius. This behavior, according to analysts, was deliberate. He wasn't compulsive. He was calculating. And Raven Elise was not the first transgender escort he had contacted. Chat logs show at least 3 prior contacts with trans-identifying sex workers, all through coded search tags on adult listing sites. Most declined repeated bookings. One even blocked him after an argument over time extensions and payment. One of the few who started connecting the dots before the murder was Darnell, the finance secretary. Weeks before the shooting, he told a close friend that something felt off with the books, like someone was covering more than they were spending. He didn't push further. He respected Gregory too much, or maybe he feared what asking might expose. But none of the hidden behavior became dangerous until that final transaction. Raven wasn't like the others. She didn't disappear quietly. When Gregory refused to pay her for the arranged service, she didn't just get angry. She began collecting. She screenshot every message, saved voice notes, wrote down his car's plate number. She even pulled footage from a gas station where they met near the hotel. She didn't know exactly what she'd do with the evidence, but she wasn't going to be erased or humiliated quietly. This wasn't just about the money. To her, it was about being seen as disposable by a man the world bowed to. And Gregory? He thought the silence would last, like it always had. He was wrong. Raven Elise had never expected the world to protect her. She had learned early on that people like her were often tolerated, but rarely defended. By 28, she had survived more than many lived through in a lifetime, and she had the paper trail to prove it. Originally from Baton Rouge, Raven left home at 17. Her birth name was never publicly shared, but she legally changed it 3 years later after beginning her gender transition. The relationship with her family had collapsed shortly after. By the time she moved to Houston, she was on her own, working night shifts, sharing apartments, and doing freelance makeup gigs that barely covered bills. When things got tight, she began escorting, starting with online chats and slowly moving into physical bookings. It wasn't something she advertised publicly, but in private, she was meticulous. She kept records, logged every client's details, and filed screenshots in cloud folders. Not out of paranoia, out of protection. In her circle, it wasn't uncommon to hear of girls who got ghosted, mistreated, or worse. No one came to their defense. No one believed them. Raven wasn't naive. She knew how people viewed her. A black trans woman doing sex work was the last person society would rush to defend. Despite that, she remained grounded. Neighbors described her as polite, private, and reserved. She didn't throw parties. She didn't draw attention. Her apartment was small and modest, with a neat vanity, racks of wigs, and sticky notes on the mirror, reminders of goals she hoped to reach. One note read, 3 more months. Out. It referred to her goal of quitting sex work entirely. She had plans to start her own makeup brand. She had even registered a business name online. Then came Gregory Talbert. She received the booking through a site she rarely used anymore, one reserved for clients who requested full discretion. The tone of his messages was careful, professional. He requested a specific time, location, and insisted on no phone calls, only encrypted messages. When she asked if he was married, he ignored the question. They met outside a hotel room in a small town about 40 minutes out. She recognized him immediately, not because she had seen him before, but because he carried himself with the clean, polished air of someone important. During the encounter, something shifted. He was cold, dismissive. When she asked for full payment, he refused, claimed the experience wasn't worth it, called her a bad investment. According to Raven's notes and voice memos sent to a friend that night, Gregory was the first client to ever use the word filthy during a session. She walked out without the rest of her pay, shaken, embarrassed, and furious. It wasn't the loss of money that drove her over the edge. It was the humiliation, the way he had treated her like an object, then vanished like it never happened, and worse, the realization that he was someone respected, someone powerful, someone who stood every week and told people how to live, how to love, how to repent. She made no impulsive decisions. She waited. That imbalance haunted her. For 2 days, she watched him post motivational scriptures online while pretending she didn't exist. She spoke to no one about her plan. Not her neighbor, not her friend, not even her therapist. But inside, something began to harden. To Raven, this wasn't about money anymore. It was about being invisible. And she had decided, if no one was going to see her, she'd make them. The public image of Gregory Talbert remained intact, but behind closed doors, things were beginning to fracture. Gregory began skipping midweek planning meetings and appeared visibly distracted during his weekend teachings. A few members began whispering about how tired he seemed. He blamed a lingering flu, but Melissa wasn't convinced. At one point, she tried unlocking his tablet to transfer notes for a service, but found the password had been changed. That had never happened before. Meanwhile, Gregory was in full damage control mode. Raven had messaged him again. No threats, no blackmail, just a final text that read, "You don't get to erase me." He never replied, but his paranoia grew. That evening, a final message was received by Gregory's secondary phone line, a text from Raven Elise. The message was short. "I know who you are. I'm coming." Data logs show the message was read, then immediately deleted. The device was reset to factory settings less than an hour later. Raven made no contact with anyone else that night. Based on phone records and online activity logs, she had been mostly offline in the days leading up to Sunday. She had withdrawn $300 from her personal account the day prior and deleted several files from her cloud storage, including screenshots of previous clients. Gregory's screenshots were preserved. At 6 a.m. Sunday morning, Gregory logged into his church planner system and made small edits to the Sunday order of service, removing the mid-sermon announcement segment and shortening the choir session by several minutes. At 8:43 a.m., he arrived at the church building and briefly met with his assistant pastor in the back office. According to the assistant's later account, Gregory appeared composed, but distracted. Melissa arrived with the children around 9:30 a.m. According to statements from other members, she appeared normal, maybe a bit quiet. At approximately 10:12 a.m., ushers began seating attendees. The sanctuary was 70% full by the time worship began. Surveillance footage from the church's front entrance showed Raven entering the building at exactly 10:49 a.m. She was wearing a light gray hoodie and black jeans. Her face was uncovered. She was carrying a black tote bag with no visible markings. At 10:51 a.m., during the sermon, Raven Elise moved past the final row of chairs and entered the center aisle. She was calm. Witnesses said she didn't run, didn't shout, and didn't respond to people trying to direct her to a seat. Her focus was fixed ahead, on the pulpit. The church's longtime usher, Malcolm Dean, noticed the disruption immediately. According to surveillance footage, he stepped into the aisle, raising his hand to intercept her before she reached the front. Multiple witnesses stated they heard him say something in a low voice, but no shouting occurred. What followed was fast. Raven pulled a concealed handgun from her tote bag and fired once into Malcolm's chest. He collapsed instantly. Panic erupted inside the room. Screams broke out. Dozens of people rushed toward the exits. Some ducked under pews, others ran into side rooms. Several individuals later told investigators they initially thought it was a staged performance or live skit, until they saw blood pooling around Malcolm's body. Raven continued forward. With the congregation in chaos, she climbed the 3 shallow steps leading to the pulpit. Gregory was standing behind the podium. According to video footage and eyewitness accounts, he froze when the shot was fired, but remained rooted in place. It's unclear whether he recognized Raven immediately. She raised the gun again and fired twice. The first shot struck Gregory in the chest. The second entered through his neck. He fell backward against the pulpit, slumping to the floor and knocking over his microphone stand. There were no final words, no struggle. He died at the scene. Raven then sat on the first step of the platform and placed the weapon beside her. Her head was lowered. She did not attempt to flee or hide. One survivor described her as calm, like she had nothing left to say. Another said she appeared frozen in place. Police received the first emergency call at 10:53 a.m. Multiple 911 calls followed in rapid succession. Officers arrived on site at 11:02 a.m. By that time, the building had mostly been evacuated. A few members remained outside, some in shock, others attempting to give aid to Malcolm Dean. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Officers found Raven sitting silently near the pulpit. She did not resist arrest. She answered questions clearly and without hesitation. Her identity was confirmed within minutes through her state-issued ID and facial recognition. The firearm was registered to her under her legal name. During the vehicle transport to the station, officers noted that Raven showed no signs of distress. She requested water and remained otherwise silent. Inside her bag, officers found a folder with printed screenshots. They included messages exchanged between her and Gregory Talbert under the alias Jonas Graham, financial transaction logs, and an appointment confirmation from a known escort platform. There was also a folded note on top of the pile. It read, "No threats, just facts. Tell them who he really was." At the station, she was placed in a holding cell without incident. She was formally charged the same afternoon. Back at the scene, investigators began securing the premises. Blood spatter analysis confirmed the shots were fired at close range. The positions of the bodies matched eyewitness reports. Officers recovered the full audio and partial video recordings from the in-house surveillance system. The sermon mic captured both gunshots clearly. The incident stunned the local community. Gregory had no public controversies, no legal record. His death, especially in such a public, symbolic space, sent shockwaves through the congregation. But what was initially seen as an unprovoked act of violence quickly shifted. Within hours, the screenshots surfaced. Within days, the double life was exposed, and everything that followed, from arrest to trial, would force the community to look at their former leader not through a lens of grief, but through the truth he had buried for years. Raven Elise did not ask for an attorney during her initial booking. She answered standard intake questions without hesitation, gave her full legal name, and listed her emergency contact as none. When asked if she understood the charges, she responded yes. For the first 18 hours in custody, she remained quiet. According to the lead investigator's report, Raven didn't ask about her case, the victims, or her potential sentence. She sat upright in her holding cell, spoke only when addressed, and kept her eyes forward. When detectives brought her into the interview room the following day, She declined to answer questions at first, but after being shown a folder containing the evidence recovered from her bag, including screenshots, receipts, and chat logs, Raven broke her silence. The statement was not emotional. It was direct. She confirmed she had met Gregory Talbert 2 weeks prior through an escort site. She detailed the encounter, the time, location, and the circumstances under which she said she was refused full payment. She stated that Talbert had mocked her, made comments about her body, and dismissed her when she asked for the remainder of the agreed fee. She told investigators she felt humiliated and unsafe. But more than that, she felt erased. Raven explained that she kept receipts and documentation as a precaution due to past experiences with clients who became aggressive, threatening, or manipulative. She said she had never previously acted on anger or sought revenge. But Gregory's public position and the contrast between his behavior in private and persona in public crossed a line she said she had never faced before. Her exact words, according to the transcript, were, "He stands in front of people and talks about sin like it doesn't live in him. I wasn't going to let him pretend anymore." Raven stated that she didn't initially plan to commit violence. She considered posting the evidence online or sending it anonymously to his family or church board. But she became convinced that no one would believe her. She described previous instances where people dismissed her as unstable or dramatic due to her identity and work. She said, "They never believe people like me, so I had to make them listen." The interrogation ended without a confession of premeditation. Raven acknowledged bringing the weapon, but claimed she had not decided to use it until the moment Malcolm Dean tried to stop her. She said she felt cornered and reacted. Detectives noted that her responses were consistent, detailed, and clear. Her demeanor remained composed throughout. Meanwhile, the evidence continued to build behind the scenes. Digital forensics confirmed the authenticity of the messages between Raven and Gregory's alias. Payment logs showed 2 partial deposits made to her account from a banking app linked to one of Gregory's known secondary lines. Search histories from both devices aligned with the timeline of the booking. No evidence of extortion or blackmail was found. Additionally, a review of Gregory's devices uncovered multiple deleted conversations with other sex workers, some dating back years. Few were as direct as the exchanges with Raven, but the pattern was consistent: bookings, encrypted communications, and attempts to conceal identity. Raven's public defender later issued a statement describing her as a person who had been repeatedly exploited and dismissed, and was driven to an irreversible act after exhausting every other option to be heard. The case was no longer just about a murder. It had become a full unraveling of a man, a platform, and a silence that had gone unchecked for far too long. While investigators gathered evidence and headlines focused on Raven's motive, the Talbert household was collapsing under the weight of what was left behind. Melissa Talbert, widowed and blindsided, was forced to confront 2 traumas at once: the murder of her husband in front of a congregation, and the revelation that he had been living a hidden life involving years of sexual misconduct, deception, and misuse of finances. In her first formal statement to investigators, Melissa confirmed she had never known about any of Gregory's aliases, secret devices, or off-the-books travel. She admitted to noticing changes in his behavior: frequent disappearances, a shift in mood, and sudden financial tightness, but attributed them to ministry burnout. According to her, he often said he was carrying more than he could say. That silence became her burden. Once presented with screenshots, payment records, and archived messages from Gregory's encrypted accounts, Melissa sat in silence for several minutes before responding. Her only words, as noted in the interview transcript, were, "So all of it was a lie." Their 16-year-old son, Kendrick, was pulled from school shortly after the news spread. Despite efforts to shield him, students had already begun sharing articles and online commentary. Some posts included photos of Raven, side by side with Gregory, taken from footage of the church's live stream. Several classmates made inappropriate jokes. Others asked if the rumors were true. Kendrick reportedly stopped speaking for nearly a week. When a school counselor visited the home, Melissa requested a transfer to another district. Outside the home, judgment was swift. Some members of the community rallied around Melissa, offering meals, prayer visits, and support. Others withdrew entirely. One family friend, during an interview, said, "People didn't know whether to grieve him or distance themselves from the shame." And that left her standing in the middle. A few days after the funeral, Melissa discovered a second prepaid phone hidden inside Gregory's locked desk drawer. The device contained several active conversations with sex workers, some dating back months. She provided the phone to investigators and declined to comment further. The financial fallout followed next. A private audit of church spending revealed irregularities tied to Gregory's personal activities. Melissa, who had partial access to shared bank accounts, was removed from the handling of funds during the investigation. She later made a public statement through her attorney, stating she had no knowledge or participation in the financial misconduct. Her name was cleared, but the damage to her reputation within some circles was irreversible. Court records indicate she later filed a civil suit to protect her children's financial future from creditor claims tied to Gregory's misuse of funds. In private conversations shared by a trusted family member, Melissa reportedly said, "I buried the man I married. But the man who died? I never even met him. What was left behind was not just grief. It was confusion, humiliation, and a quiet, irreversible loss that would follow her and her children long after the cameras were gone." Raven Elise was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, one for the death of Pastor Gregory Talbert and one for the killing of Usher Malcolm Dean. Additional charges included unlawful possession of a firearm on religious property and endangering public safety. From the beginning, the case drew a divided public reaction. The prosecution's position was straightforward. Raven had planned the attack. She brought a loaded weapon into a crowded public space and fired it with intent to kill. Whether or not she had been mistreated by Gregory Talbert, they argued, her actions were deliberate and deadly. Prosecutors introduced surveillance footage, ballistic reports, and testimony from forensic analysts confirming that both shots were fired at close range and with clear aim. But the defense approached the case from a different angle. They acknowledged the killings. They acknowledged the weapon. What they argued was that Raven had experienced a psychological collapse triggered by repeated exploitation, humiliation, and the fear that no one would ever hear her side of the story. Her attorney presented screenshots, payment logs, and chat transcripts detailing Gregory's arrangement with her, including derogatory language used after the encounter. The defense also introduced expert testimony from a clinical psychologist who evaluated Raven during her incarceration. The psychologist described her as emotionally shut down, hypervigilant, and suffering from compounded trauma related to years of discrimination, abandonment, and repeated experiences of being dehumanized by clients who used her services and discarded her without consequence. There was no question of her guilt, but there were layers to her motive that complicated the public narrative. Several courtroom spectators walked out during the reading of Gregory Talbert's private messages. They included explicit language, repeated derogatory references to Raven's identity, and instructions for secrecy. Melissa Talbert did not attend those sessions. On the final day of arguments, the jury was presented with Raven's handwritten note recovered from her bag. It read, "No threats. just facts. Tell them who he really was. In closing, her attorney said, "She was not a threat until she was made invisible. She asked to be seen and was mocked. She asked to be paid and was degraded. And still, she didn't run. She sat down and waited for you to see the truth yourself." The prosecution rebutted with a reminder. 2 lives were lost. A respected community member and a husband, yes, but also an usher, a father of 3, who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong moment. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Raven was found guilty on both counts of murder, but in a rare split decision, the court agreed to consider mitigating circumstances during sentencing. Due to the psychological profile presented and lack of prior criminal record, she was spared life without parole. Raven Elise was sentenced to 32 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 24. She showed no visible emotion as the sentence was read. Outside the courthouse, reactions remained polarized. Some viewed the sentence as justice. Others saw it as a system once again failing to fully recognize the trauma of people whose voices rarely make it to court without being filtered or criminalized. Malcolm Dean's family issued a short statement. He died doing what he always did, protecting people. He didn't deserve to be in the middle of someone else's war. Melissa declined interviews after the verdict. She was last seen leaving the courthouse with her children, escorted by her sister and attorney. Her silence, like Raven's final words, echoed louder than any public statement. No appeals were filed, no restitution was requested, and the case, though closed in court, left questions that may never be answered in full. He preached about light. She walked in carrying a storm. And in the end, the lies didn't just come out. They exploded. If this story made you question what people hide behind titles, behind pulpits, behind polished lives, then you're in the right place. At True Crime Corner, we uncover the masks, one crime at a time. Subscribe now, because behind every godly smile, there might be a secret waiting to shatter everything.